Hi, this is the fourth or fifth in our series on the Bible's greatest hits, according to me. And we've looked at what we're looking at is what I consider to be the most important stories in the Old and the New Testament that shape what we understand as Christians. Um, the the first sessions we merged resurrection and crucifixion. It was my conviction that resurrection is the most important, but it's only really understood in connection with the crucifixion of Jesus. So that was originally my number two, was crucifixion. But in our conversation, I realized that those are like one and two, where you can't distinguish between them. They're necessary for each other. The next theme that we were looking at was the incarnation, the notion that God, the creator of the universe, became enfleshed, became part of creation in Jesus, and just what it means for that is one of the basic doctrines of Christianity, is that Jesus is the Son of God. And very closely related to that in terms of the theme of enfleshment was our understanding of the gift of the Lord's Supper, in which that earthly and yet heavenly version of Jesus, down to earth and yet divine version of Jesus, comes to us and is incarnate in us, enfleshed in us. Last week, we went back to kind of the origins of this whole storyline, and that's the promises that God made, the call to Abraham and Sarah, the promises that God made to them, and the kind of the stories leading up to what's today's focus, which is the Exodus. But I want to go back and do a little bit of recap of the call of Abraham and Sarah, and some of this will be familiar. I think will be familiar to you, but it's kind of to get us from Abraham and Sarah to the Israelites in Egypt, enslaved in Egypt. So Abraham and Sarah are given this promise by God. God says, follow me to a land that I will show you, and I will make you a great people, and through you I will bless all people. And Abraham and Sarah leave everything familiar to them and follow God into this strange land. If you happen to have your Bibles in front of you, many Bibles have maps in the back, and it would be helpful, I think, if you were able to refer to a map of the ancient Mideast, or there's a lot of Bibles have multiple maps of the Mideast at different stages of the Bible. Yeah. So we've talked before, during Abraham and Sarah eventually did have a child. That was the beginning of the fulfillment of the promise that they would become a great nation, that they would be the ancestors of a great nation. That child is Isaac. We're going to follow this family line for a couple of generations. Isaac is this absolutely horrid story in I don't remember, Genesis 12 maybe, where Isaac has been born. They're it's so wonderful that they have an heir. He grows up to be 12 years old, and God says to Abraham, you know that child that I promised you, Isaac, your only child? God says, I want you to sacrifice him to me. It's one of the grossest stories in the Bible. And maybe I don't think it's just because I'm a father. I think it's just an atrocity, even though, as you know, at the end, just before Abraham kills his son as a sacrifice to show his, nope, you're my one God. I'll do anything you say. Just to prove that he was going to kill this child of the promise. And God intervenes and says, don't do that. Over there in the bushes, there's a ram caught in the bushes. Sacrifice him instead. And that's how the story kind of resolves itself. But again, it's a strange and very, very carefully put together story that the ancient Hebrews wanted to save in their understanding of their first ancestors, Abraham and Sarah. So that story lived on in the tradition. We don't really see Isaac again. Isaac grows; he's saved. He grows up. When it's time for him to get a wife, they send him, Sarah and Abraham send him back to where they came from, and he finds a woman of the same tribe and brings her back to Canaan, where Abraham and Sarah and their household are nomadic, a nomadic tribe in Canaan. Remember, we noticed last week, or we noted last week, that even the biblical writer says, when Abraham came into Canaan, the Canaanites were in the land, or something like. I mean, it implies that it's understood that the Canaanites have claim on that land, and Abraham negotiates with the Canaanites to be a good neighbor, nomadically moving around that area with all his herds and so on, and basically under a kind of an agreement with the landowners that he wasn't going to occupy it or anything like that. So Isaac comes back with his cousin, who's now his wife also, and they have two kids. Again, a wonderful set of stories. The mother, Rebecca, is she gets pregnant with twins. And the story in Genesis is that when they were getting ready to be born, the um, the larger of the two babies was about to be born, and the smaller of the two babies kind of squirmed his way around his brother and came out the birth canal. No, it's not. He still was number two, but it was. I guess it was. I know what it was. His arm came out of the birth canal. The smaller baby's arm came out of the birth canal. It came back in, and then the bigger baby, Esau, was born, and Jacob was born right after that. So he was in kind of, the idea is they were struggling in the womb for dominance. And that becomes kind of the theme of their relationship. And the what becomes kind of a soap opera for a while, in each of them attempting to deceive the other one in order to get a better place in the family, and ultimately a better blessing from their father Esau, who of course, their father Isaac, who was the son of Abraham and Sarah. So they were kind of, the idea was this blessing that had been given originally to Abraham and Sarah had been passed on to Isaac. And there's a scene in Genesis where Abraham is dying and kind of passes that on ritually. And then when when Isaac is getting ready to die, and he's prepared to pass on this special blessing that he had received from Abraham, that he was prepared to pass that on to his oldest son, Esau. And the wonderful story is told. Jacob and his mother, their mother, conspired to make Jacob kind of look and feel and smell like his brother Esau. Isaac by this time was blind, so they got Isaac says to Esau, "Go out in the field and capture some kind of thing for us to eat together, and we'll sit down and eat together, and I'll pass on this blessing." And he goes out to the field, and Jacob sneaks into Isaac's tent and says, "I'm back, Dad." And Isaac says, "So soon?" He says, "Yeah, but yeah, it's me. You can feel they've got a skin on his back," because Esau was very hairy. So they put a pelt on his back. They made him smell bad because Esau was of the earth. Jacob was a more refined kind of nomad. And as a result, Isaac did in fact pass on this special blessing to Jacob. And then, meanwhile, just after that had finished, Esau came back with his deer or antelope or whatever he had killed. And Jacob's on the way out of the tent saying, "I just got the blessing. Go ahead and cook the meal for the old man if you want. I got what we both wanted." And you can imagine the anger that Esau has. It's murderous, and Jacob knows it, and Jacob and his whole family flee, and they go to another part in Canaan. Jacob then becomes the main, the next generation that's kind of bearing this blessing. And Jacob, as you know, has 12 sons. One of the good stories again, in this part of Genesis is when God, Esau has built up a whole army to go after his brother Jacob. And they go back and forth for years, this rivalry and this Esau hunting Jacob. And finally they come to this, what's going to be the make or break situation. And Jacob sends all of his family, his tribes, and everybody, his troops and everybody, his servants, everybody to the other side of a river. And he stays on this side where he knows his brother is going to come. And first of all, he struggles all night with an angel, apparently. It's not clear if it's God himself or it's an angel of God. But he wrestles all night, and neither of them is winning. And toward the morning, the angel touches basically the hip of Jacob, and he's crippled in the hip, and Jacob still won't let go and won't let him go until he gives him a blessing. And the personage says, "I am the God of your father your father Isaac, your grandfather Abraham, and I am the God of these promises that I made to them, that I'm continuing with you." The end of that story is right after that, Esau's whole army does arrive, and they confront each other, and Jacob is ready to be executed by his brother. And his brother says, "You're my brother." And they embrace and basically live happily ever after. It's a real tense and touching set of stories about division and reconciliation, even among brothers. So that generation, Jacob has all these sons. The Bible kind of gives short shrift to the fact that he had a bushel full of daughters also. And the sons and the daughters all had a bunch of children. The best stories about Jacob's kids are the series of stories about the Joseph, who was Jacob's favorite son. And the Bible, again, this is so interesting, I think, that these people so long ago thought it was important to preserve these parts of the story. Jacob is unabashedly favorable toward his son Joseph. He's by far the favorite son. Just to make sure everybody knows that, he gets a Letterman's jacket made for Joseph to wear that just says favorite son on the front. And the so there's that, how tone deaf does Jacob have to be, how stupid a father, uh, uh, to be that biased. But then the hero of the story is Joseph, and here's a not too bright Joseph saying to his brothers, I've been dreaming lately, and every time I have this dream, and there's a bushel of wheat and 11 other bushels of wheat, and I'm in one and you guys are all in the other, and you're all bowing down to me. And they say, oh yeah, thanks for sharing that with us, Joe. And then he has another one where he dreams that he's the sun and all the stars, the moon, everything circles around him, including in this vision. He says, and I understand that those stars are you guys, and the sun is our dad Jacob, and the moon is our mother's, and I'm the center of it. And again, they are very resentful of that. They finally come up with a scheme to get rid of him. And they one time when they're all out together, all 12 brothers, a caravan, well, originally they gang up on him. They decide to kill him. Before they kill him, they rip off that special jacket, Dad's favorite jacket that Jacob had given him, and they come up with a plan to put blood all over that jacket and tell their dad that that a really mean ram had attacked the flock, and Joseph laid down his life for the flock. And but meantime, before they can carry that out, they just threw him in a pit that they knew he couldn't get out of. Then they went and did all the ripping the coat up and killing a goat and splattering its blood on the coat. And then they were going back to retrieve him from this pit and finish him off when a caravan, and it's interesting, it's a caravan of Ishmaelites. This is the tribe that arose from, remember, Abraham and Sarah were frustrated that they weren't having this child of promise, and Abraham had a child with Sarah's maid, and that was Ishmael. And God said, no, that's not the child of the promise. And God kind of gave her and Ishmael kind of a pension, but also a you're not this family of Abraham that I'm putting together. And here it is, a couple generations later, the descendants of that half brother of Isaac is a caravan, trading caravan, and the brothers decide instead of killing Joseph, they could sell him and get some money so that they could go party. So they do that. They sell him, and he's taken into slavery in Egypt. The brothers do go back and tell Jacob the sad news about brave Joseph's death, and Jacob is never the same again until the very end of the story, when Jacob and Joseph are reunited. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. So Joseph's gone. Jacob has 11 sons and bunches of daughters and a whole bunch of children and grandchildren and so on. They've become a sizable tribe. You wouldn't call it a kingdom, but a sizable tribe. They're still just camping out in various places in Canaan. I've mentioned before, only the burial plot for Sarah, and eventually then also for Abraham and Isaac and Rebecca. That's the only land that the Abraham tribe owned in Canaan. Anyway, they're going from place to place. A famine hits Canaan. The what are now called the Israelites, the tribe of Israel. I didn't mention that Jacob gets a new name at that encounter with God, that wrestling match. God changes Jacob's name to Israel. It's very confusing because as history goes on, Israel and Jacob become two different things. And anyway, that again is getting ahead of ourselves. Famine hits. Jacob sends his sons down to Egypt, to where there is a surplus, so that they can get some grain to bring back to their homes in Canaan. Inserted in that narrative is also the parallel narrative of what happened to Joseph. And again, it's just a wonderfully well-crafted, even, you've heard me say this before about Scripture, even humorous portrayal of this one of the great heroes of Israelite history. Joseph goes down to Egypt as a slave. He is bought by a very well-heeled guy with a big mansion, and Joseph just works for him, works hard for him, and the owner, Potiphar, notices that this is a trustworthy slave, and eventually puts the whole household, makes him steward of his whole household. We assume this was over the course of a number of years, and it wasn't like a week or two that he trusted Joseph that way. So Joseph really had a pretty decent life living in the household of Potiphar. The only problem was that Potiphar's wife had the hots for Joseph and made that quite plain. And Joseph resisted and resisted. And one time she was overzealous and stripped his robe off him. And it happened that Potiphar walked in the door and saw his wife and Joseph that way, and immediately blamed Joseph for taking advantage of his wife. So he had Joseph thrown in prison. While Joseph is in prison, there are two other people in prison with him. One is the Pharaoh's former butler. The other is the Pharaoh's former baker. And for some reason we're not told why, they lost Pharaoh's favor and they were thrown into the dungeon. They feared that would be for the rest of their lives, or that they would be executed. Turns out, in conversation with his fellow prisoners, Joseph lets on that he's pretty good at interpreting dreams. And they say, oh, good, because each of us has had a wacky dream and we don't know what it means. And Joseph says, tell me. And the butler says, I dreamt that I was serving the king and the Pharaoh. And Joseph says, your dream means, in fact, you are going to be released and you're going to be restored. And the baker says, I dreamed I had a whole basket full of bread that I was carrying on my head. And a bunch of ravens came down and ate all the bread. And then they went away. What the heck does that mean? And Joseph says, that means your head is about to get chopped off. Sorry. You asked, and I'm telling you what I think it means. In fact, that is what happened. In a few days, the butler was restored to his place, and the baker was executed. Joseph's still in prison. Story progresses that Pharaoh starts having some bizarre dreams, and he's troubled. He can't sleep, except as soon as he sleeps, he has these dreams. So he gathers all his wise people, priests and everybody, and says, what do these mean? And nobody can help him. And then the butler says, there's a guy I was in prison with. I know a guy. And Pharaoh calls Joseph from the prison to interpret the dream. And I'm sure you remember the dreams either from reading them numerous times from the Bible or from the Technicolor Dream, Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat. But it's the Pharaoh dreams. First, there are he sees 7 really fat cows just luxuriating along the Nile, and then he sees 7 really, really skinny cows right behind them, and the skinny cows eat the fat cows, and they're still skinny. And that's how the dream ends. And then he has a variation on that dream where it's stalks of corn. There's 7 beautiful stalks of corn, and then over here there's 7 really bad stalks of corn. And excuse me, in the dream, the sick stalks of corn devour the healthy ones, and all of it is nasty now. And again, he says, I don't get the meaning of this. And Joseph says, the 7 fat cows and the 7 fat ears of corn represent 7 surplus bumper years for the crops in Egypt. The 7 shriveled up cows and corn stalks represent 7 years of incredible famine. And the fact that the famine overtakes the even the what was produced in surplus is a bad portent for Egypt's future. And Joseph, Pharaoh, first of all, says, "Oh, that's perfectly clear. What are we going to do about it?" And Joseph says, "If I were you, I would find somebody to make it the number one priority in Egypt to take advantage of the 7 great years and to build storehouses so that we're ready for the 7 famine years." And Pharaoh thinks about that and decides it's a good idea and decides to put Joseph in charge of that. And Joseph becomes essentially the prime minister, the second in command. And he's given his own chariot and his own palace. And the one of the Pharaoh's daughters, I think, maybe was part of the package. And he becomes a almost co-ruler with the all-powerful Pharaoh. And in fact, for 7 years under Joseph's leadership, Egypt builds massive stores of grain. And then, in fact, when the 7 famine years start, they can start, dealing it out from the great stores that they had. It's in that environment that Jacob from Canaan, which is north and east of Egypt, Jacob sends his sons down to Egypt to get some grain. They, of course, don't know that this vice pharaoh, Joseph, is their brother. And again, they're just a wonderful set of stories and intrigue and brothers playing tricks on brothers that comes through. And this is our holy scripture. And I love that our ancestors have preserved for us the humanity of our ancestors in faith. And not that they are some kind of, they were saints, will never live up to their greatness. It's in every case, almost every one of the great people in Israelites' history is shown to be just human. And that's that for better and for worse. So to finish out this Joseph set of stories, the brothers come, they ask for rations to take back to their father Jacob. Joseph recognizes them, but they don't recognize him. He's probably got royal trappings and eyeliner out to his ears and stuff like that. So there's again these wonderful stories of the interaction between these brothers that are now bowing down before him and saying, "Our Father, the sun and the moon and the star dream, that guy is the one who sent us here to to ask for your mercy." Again, they don't know it's him. And finally, after some some fun games, I guess you would say. Finally, Joseph reveals himself to them. He says, "Don't you recognize who I am? I'm your brother Joseph." And they are scared to death. They rightly, I guess, not rightly assume, but they expect that those guards on each side of Vice King, Vice Pharaoh Joseph are now going to arrest them or stab them or do something, that Joseph's going to get his revenge. And Joseph falls on them and embraces them and kisses them and cries on their necks, and they are reconciled. And the next thing they do, Joseph asks about their father Jacob, and they say he's, other than being very hungry, he's still in Canaan. And Joseph says, "Go get him, bring him to Egypt, and we'll take care of him here." And the Pharaoh is so grateful to Joseph for having saved Egypt that the Pharaoh says, Joseph, you and your extended family can settle in that land. It floods a lot, but it's the land of Goshen. It's right where the Nile River flows into the Mediterranean Sea, and it is the most fertile land in all of Egypt, because it's constantly getting refreshed from stuff coming down the Nile and heading toward the Mediterranean. So the Israelites, the kids go up and get Jacob. Jacob comes down with the whole tribe. I think Genesis might tell us at that point. I don't have it in my mind how many people it is at that point, but they are welcomed to Egypt by the Pharaoh and set up in this really, really good place in Egypt. And Jacob and Joseph are reunited. And when Jacob dies, they take his mummy, apparently, back up to that burial place in Canaan, but then they come back to Egypt. The Israelites are pretty much ensconced in Egypt by this point. That's where the book of Genesis ends. The book of Exodus, and we're going to go more into Exodus next week because it's so important. But excuse me, the book of Exodus very pointedly begins by saying, it gives some kind of date how long the Israelites have been guests in Egypt, honored guests in Egypt. It's something like 100 years to, it's generations. And they've, in the meantime, grown into a very populous group of people. The book of Exodus begins with, "And then there arose on the throne in Egypt a Pharaoh who didn't know Joseph." In other words, had no regard for any promises that a predecessor pharaoh had made. It's worth noting that there's strong historical evidence that right in this time frame of it's hard to pinpoint it 100 years here or 100 years there, but in this time frame, a new dynasty arose in Egypt that was not a native dynasty. They were people who were refugees from the Trojan Wars. They were refugees from the wars going on in what we now call Turkey and in what we now call Greece. Those wars were creating many, many refugees. And some organized group of them apparently, and these are called the Hyksos, invaded and conquered Egypt and set one of their own up on the throne in Egypt. And then they had a dynasty of a number of generations. I'd have to go back and look at the history, but that would help explain, the coming of a pharaoh that didn't remember Joseph. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this new pharaoh sees this large and growing tribe of Israelites or Hebrews, interchangeable terms, and sees them on the best land in Egypt, and doesn't know why that should be. So he slowly works at moving them from the land and essentially moving them into servitude or even slavery, rather than the freedom that they had enjoyed. They were put to work at the behest of the state, of the pharaoh, to do public works projects for the Egyptian government. And that goes on for a number of generations, that the Israelites or the Hebrews are essentially enslaved in Egypt. Quite a turnaround from they had arrived as welcomed, honored guests, and now they are essentially in chains, just because the new ruler didn't remember how essential Joseph was to the to the power, or to the state. Just to set, we've got just a few more minutes, and I want to just kind of set the stage for the Exodus itself. The story is told in Exodus that as part of the repression of the Hebrews or the Israelites, the Pharaoh ordered that that all Israelite boy babies should be killed, and sent soldiers into Goshen or wherever the Hebrews were to make sure there were no babies under 2 years old. A couple of interesting allusions that come from Christian allusions that come from this set of stories. One is that the story, the story is told in, I think it's in Matthew, about the wise men coming to Herod and saying, we saw the star of the new king of the Jews. We saw his star. We've come to pay homage to him. And Herod figures out with his lackeys that it was predicted that this Messiah would come in Bethlehem. So he sends the wise men to Bethlehem and says, go find the child so that I can come and worship him too. Come back and tell me where he is. And they go, an angel tells them not to go back to Herod. And Herod then reacts by ordering that all Hebrew boys 2 years old or younger should be executed, should be killed. Mary and Joseph take Jesus, and they become refugees in, of all places, Egypt. They go to Egypt and they stay in Egypt for a few years until Herod is dead, and then they think it's safe to come back to Judah, but then they find out that Herod's son is on the throne, and so they don't come back to Bethlehem in Judah. They go up north to Galilee, and they raise Jesus in Galilee, up near Lebanon. There is in the Christian scripture this story about the Holy Family going into exile in Egypt. Matthew says this is to fulfill the passage of scripture that says, I call my anointed up from Egypt. And again, the Christians are understanding this to be that Jesus is being brought back from Egypt. The other note on that particular passage is escaping me at the moment. It may come back to me. Let me stop and see if you've got any questions. We've got just a couple of minutes left. Any questions or comments, confusion? Okay, we'll take up basically where we left off today. We'll take up next week. So it'll be more and in a more detailed way on the Exodus. We have kind of the build up to it. And now we'll get into the story itself. Any questions? Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.